4.1 Ethical, Legal and Health and Safety Issues in Research. The preparation of the subjects was also very poor, as the researchers shortened the participants' warm-ups, as the boy that got injured took a lot of time to sort out. This is a bad practice because it means that the participants won't be warmed up as effectively, so it increases the chance of them getting injured as their muscles won't be as pliable. The consequence of this is that the participant can get physically harmed because of the researcher's decision, which means that if they got injured, the researcher may get a criminal law tribunal. This is because the researcher's actions led to a child getting hurt, which is a criminal offence, so they may receive a large fine or even a prison sentence if the injury is extremely serious. They may also need supervision for a set amount of time when doing experiments, as they won't be trusted to conduct tests on their own. The correct thing to do is to give everyone a warm-up that is long enough and well planned so that it is effective and will reduce the risk of injury. A physical activity readiness questionnaire is a series of questions to do with the participant's health in order to see if the researcher needs to take any precautions or to see if the participants will be able to safely take part in the experiment. The researcher failed to do a physical activity readiness questionnaire, which is very important as it is essential to get the participants to do this beforehand. This is because if something happens to the participant because of a medical issue, then it could backfire on the researcher, as they have a responsibility to find out whether it is safe for the participants to take part in. If the researcher fails to do a PARQ and the participant gets harmed because the experiment is not safe for their medical issue, then the consequence could be a criminal law tribunal. This is because the researcher has a responsibility to keep the participants safe, and if they fail to do a PARQ, then it could cause physical harm to the participant, so they could then press charges. This could lead to a large fine or, in more serious situations, a prison sentence, as the research could cause life-threatening injuries if they do not ask the participant questions about their medical history first. The correct thing to do is to always do a PARQ with the participants before the experiments, as it will keep them safe. Here is an example of a PARQ. Scenario 3. A risk assessment is a document used to identify different risks that could happen during an experiment and what controls need to be in place to stop the risk from occurring. A good thing that the researcher did was that they created a detailed risk assessment. This is a good practice as it means that the researcher and the participants will be safer during the experiment because the risks are being controlled. Also, it means that the researcher will be protected if anyone gets injured, as they took the correct precautions and created a risk assessment so they cannot be taken to court unless it is directly their fault. A risk-benefit analysis is used to see whether the benefits of carrying out an experiment outweigh the risks of doing the experiment. This way, the researchers can see whether it is worth taking the risk, as they will be able to see the advantages that the experiment could give them to support their research. A good thing that this researcher did is that they made a risk-benefit analysis, which means that the experiment wouldn't be safe to do, as they have taken into account the risks and benefits of the test. This is because they can see that there are few risks and they will not cause serious harm to the participants, so the benefits of the experiment will outweigh this. Ethical clearance is something given to researchers by an ethical committee. The point of this is so that the ethical committee can judge whether an experiment is ethically and morally correct, and that it will not cause physical or psychological harm to anyone involved. This researcher got ethical clearance, which is a very good practice as it means that if anything happens to the participant, that they have proof that their test was safe to take part in, so anything that happened would just be an accident. Subject disclaimer is a form that is given to a participant before an experiment or test to remind them of the risks involved so that they can make a legal agreement that states that if anything happens to the participant, then it is their responsibility, as they have agreed to the risks. This researcher failed to give the participants a subject disclaimer, which is a bad practice because if a participant gets harmed in any way because of taking part in the experiment, then the researcher will be held responsible. This is because they didn't explain the risks of the test beforehand, so it would be seen as deception. The consequences to the participant is that they could be psychologically or physically harmed, as they may be traumatized by something that happens as they were not warned of the risks. Also, they may be pushed out of their comfort zones, as they were not told how hard this test would be, so they could get injured as they are not able to keep up with the demands. The consequence to the researcher is that they could get given supervision for a set amount of time, as the child's parents may complain to the university. This could give the researcher a bad reputation, as people may not want to take part in their experiments if they have heard that they have been unprofessional in the past. The correct thing to do is to always give a detailed subject disclaimer which identifies all the risks that could occur during the experiment. The researcher was also deceiving, as they told the participant that they would stop the test if they were struggling, but then failed to do so, which resulted in the participant injuring their head. Deception is extremely unethical and is a poor practice, as in many cases it can result in big problems for the researcher. The consequences for the researcher could be a criminal law tribunal, as the participant has the right to press charges against the researcher, as it is their fault that it happened. This means the researcher will either receive a fine or a prison sentence, depending on the seriousness of the harm caused the participant. This will mean that the researcher would then lose their job, as their organisation would not want them shedding a bad light on them, as it makes them look responsible for the incident. The right thing to do is to always tell the participants the risks and what they need to know if you think it could result in the participant getting harmed. You must also do what you told them you would do, because if you go back on what you said, then could be considered as deception. The researcher failed to do laboratory safety procedures, as one of the participants spilled water on the treadmill and the researcher told them to leave it as they thought it would dry quickly. This is a safety hazard, as one of the children could slip and fall on the treadmill, which could lead to them getting seriously injured. Therefore, the consequence of the participant is that they could get physically harmed, and this would lead to their parent or guardian pressing charges on the researcher, if it was serious enough. This could result in a fine or a prison sentence, depending on how much impact their injury has had on the participant's life. However, if it wasn't that serious, then it could lead to a formal reprimand, and the researcher would then get a temporary suspension, so they would not be allowed to conduct any experiments within their suspension. The correct thing to do is to prepare for specific needs such as asthma, control any risk that could occur in the laboratory, and always be hygienic, so use gloves when needed, and clean any equipment that is used. Scientific misconduct occurred as the researcher copied another researcher's accident report form that was similar to what happened to the participant in the experiment. This is plagiarism and is not acceptable, as everything in the experiment needs to be the researcher's own work, especially when it is a document like an accident report form, as it needs to be very detailed and specific. There aren't any consequences that could cause serious harm to the participant, but they may feel slightly psychologically harmed if they found out that the researcher lied to them about their work. The consequences to the research could be that they could get a large fine or a prison sentence if it is very serious and significantly affects someone or a group of people. This would then have a massive impact on the researcher's career, as not many organizations will want to hire them, as they have been very unprofessional in their last job. However, in other cases, the researcher may only get close supervision for a period of time, and they may receive extra training to make them more aware of what they should and shouldn't do. The correct thing to do is never copy other people's work unless it is cited and you have permission to use from whoever's work it is. The researcher also had a reason to terminate the test when the boy fell off the treadmill and hit his head, but they didn't choose to do so. This can put the other participants at risk, as it could happen again, so it would be safer to end the test. The consequence to the participants is that they may be psychologically harmed, as they may feel scared about doing the test after seeing someone get injured, so it could cause them to have a panic attack or get anxiety. It can also lead to the participants getting injured, as someone has already been hurt during this test, so it shows it could be unsafe for the others, as they are around the same age and ability. If another participant was then injured and the researcher had a reason to terminate the test beforehand, then it would make them responsible. This means that the consequences to the research could be that they lose their BASES accreditation, as they have shown that their behavior is dangerous and untrustworthy. They may also get a formal reprimand, as the organisation that they are working for may want to punish the researcher for giving them a bad reputation, and because they might have received a fine from the participants' parents. The correct thing to do in this situation would have been to stop the test, as the boy injuring himself shows that the test could be unsafe for the others and is not worth taking the risk. An informed consent is a document given to the participants before an experiment to make sure they feel comfortable taking part and making sure that they know the risks and what will be expected. The researcher failed to give the participants an informed consent, which is a bad practice because it means that the participants may not feel comfortable with what's involved in the test, which could lead to negative consequences for the researcher. This is because it is a legal requirement to get informed consent, so if the participant is not given one, and it leads to them being psychologically or physically harmed, then it is the researcher's responsibility, as they have failed to inform the participant of the risks and procedures involved. This could lead to a formal reprimand, such as a temporary suspension, as the organisation they work for may not want the researchers to be conducting experiments for a while, as they are not trusted to do so. This is because if they keep making mistakes, then it will give the organisation a bad reputation, so they would suspend them for a while until they believe the researcher is ready. The correct thing to do is to give all the participants an informed consent, as it will protect the participants and the researcher legally. Here is an example of what the informed consent could have been.